Hello and welcome to the Craft Beer Corner. For today's beer review, we're jumping into an Imperial Stout from Anchorage Brewing Company. This is a new beer for me. This one's called The Sacrifice. It clocks in at 15.5% ABV, so quite high. Brewed with coconut, aged in Missouri oak foeders. Anchorage Brewing Company is, of course, based in Anchorage, Alaska. So first thing first, label art. This one's pretty cool. I don't know how best to describe it. I'll try to angle that down and around to give a decent chance that maybe you can see it. But it looks really neat. I like it. We got us a classic wax dipped bottle top here. So let's just score with our nice pointy tipped bottle opener all the way around underneath that wax. Yeah, these pointy tip bottle openers really are very convenient. See, we got that clear and clean and straight off, no problem. All right, so let's get this poured right in the glass. Oh, very dark, very thick. We're gonna intentionally agitate this a bit to give it the best chance of forming the best head that it can. This one's quite active in terms of carbonation, so I don't think we're gonna get, it was just collapsing as it was trying to form. So no problem. Look, it didn't form a head. It is what it is. Oh, wow. That's a very pungent aroma coming off of this beer, I can tell you already. So first things first, visually, as expected on a 15.5% Imperial Stout, it is indeed pitch black. Absolutely pitch black. Let's get right up over for a proper sniff. Wow. That smells huge. That's got a massive aroma. So there was a ton of coconut coming off on that nose, as is just this underlying massive richness of the malt bill. There's a slight sweet suggestion, there's a slight booziness to it, and there's a little bit of a caramel and molasses aroma that's coming off as well. So it's got a really nice, interesting mix of aromas coming into play in the glass. It does look like I may have a little bit of sediment there. It could be yeast, it could just be bits of coconut. Coconut's one of those tricky ingredients with which to brew if you've never done it. But nonetheless, let's jump right in. Oh, wow. Ooh, that is a big beer. That is a big, bold, in-your-face flavor profile. Okay. So, first things first, the body on this really only feels about medium to medium heavy for me. I would expect heavy at 15.5%, but it actually feels quite a bit less robust than you would expect in this ABV range. The mouthfeel does have a good bit of resistance to it. It does not feel flat at all. It feels very thick. It doesn't really get creamy or foamy or velvety or silky when you agitate around the palate, but it does a really good job at coating all of the beer around the palate. It's quite thick and it just naturally is rather viscous. It kind of wants to stick. So not quite as big of a body. Mouthfeel feels exactly as I expected. So yeah, really nice texturally. In terms of flavor, first thing you got on swallow was just this intensity of slight sweetness and coconut. And it actually makes it taste like actual coconut flesh, not like toasted coconut. It doesn't leave any residual funky flavor behind. That's one of the reasons I said coconut is a tricky ingredient with which to brew. I've had a lot of coconut beers and some are really great and some I just, There's a quality about the coconut depending on the raw or the toasted variety and the volume and when and where and how and at what temperature you put it in your beer to where it actually tastes like coconut without getting some of these funky off flavors. I'm not sure what the process is. All I know is I've tasted a lot of beers with coconut, and that is kind of a common theme I've seen. So this is one of the few that's gotten it right. This tastes like actual coconut, and it's really nice. How that pairs with this malt bill, and how do the flavors of this malt bill relate to the aroma? So we got a lot of interesting flavors coming off of the aroma, and the majority of that is translating into the glass. So there is a slight suggestion of sweetness. There is a slight suggestion of booziness. There's a massive amount of coconut. You can really taste the coconut. And then tons of rich roasty malt. And yes, there is caramel and there is molasses. Not really getting any kind of buttery toffee kind of vibes off of it, but it's very rich, it's very decadent, and the flavor profile is very, very intense. So I'm going to jump back in for a second sip here. I'm going to explore this flavor profile again, and we'll talk about the finish, but very, very nice. Impressed by this one. Such a resistant mouthfeel. Man, just that intensity of flavor. It's coconut, slight sweetness, a little bit of a booziness. Just right away, intensity of malt immediately behind it. Tons of caramel and molasses-like qualities. There's some brown sugar, like caramelized brown sugar coming through as well that I didn't pick up on first sip. There's kind of vanilla-like flavors coming out of this one, and some deep, dark, rich, like baker's chocolate, like a triple chocolate cookie or triple chocolate chip, like very rich, very chocolatey coming out of this as well as a little bit of a slight coffee suggestion. It's more like kind of a standard house roast or a medium roast. It's not like rich French roast Italian where the beans are kind of on the edge of being burned. It's nothing like that. It's much more akin to like a medium house roast. It's a more subtle kind of coffee suggestion. Very, very nice. In terms of the finish, really, it's much longer than your average stout, to be certain. I would say it's longer than your average Imperial. Granted, this one's not barrel aged, so it's not going to get quite that same length, but these flavors are quite intense and they really do rather stick all around the palate. Like I said, this is a very thick, viscous beer, and it really does help these flavors cut around and linger. Where it finishes on the end is kind of interesting. It finishes on a little bit of a lighter, slightly more sweet, like you get the suggestion of sweetness up front without it tasting sweet. On the back end, there is a little bit of like this sweet undertone and suggestions of lingering coconut, but it almost reminds me most of like a rich chocolate milk. That's kind of how it finishes on the end. It's got this almost milk chocolate-like quality to it with a little bit of coconut hanging out of the back. Really, really nice. This is a fantastic beer. I mean, I'm not normally let down by Anchorage. There's a reason I buy their beers when I see them pop up in Tavour. Yes, I did get this one from Tavour, and we've talked about it. I'm going to say it again. Tavour is the only way to get your hands on Anchorage Brewing Company's beers if you don't live in the immediate Anchorage area. They're the only beer shipping partner and platform. It is well worth it. If for nothing else, if all you ever did was just grab Anchorage beers, it would still be worth it. Absolutely fantastic. I'm going to take my time, sip on this beer, come up with my scores. When we come back, we'll get this one ranked from top to bottom. All right, now that we've gotten to enjoy this beer, we're going to get it ranked. So this is Anchorage Brewing Company's The Sacrifice, an Imperial Stout brewed with coconut that clocks in at 15.5% ABV. It was aged in Missouri oak foeders. Anchorage Brewing Company is, of course, based in Anchorage, Alaska. So starting with the aroma. The aroma on this beer was absolutely massive, as you might expect of a stout in this ABV range, particularly one that had an added ingredient. Yeah, just massive. The aromas that came through were absolutely tremendous. A ton of coconut, slight sweetness, slight booziness. We had caramel, we had molasses. It was really just all in there in that rich underlying malt bill. The aroma gets a 10 out of 10. For the taste I absolutely loved. This was a tremendous beer. Very intense flavors. The coconut tasted like true actual coconut, no funky overtones. Had a lot of different layers of complexity, things that kept popping in, and new things to discover on subsequent sips. Taste on this one for me, 10 out of 10. For the body on this one, it was okay. It was nowhere near the breadth I expected for a stout in this range. Really, it didn't have quite the oomph that kind of goes along with this ABV range. And so, high end of average, but it wasn't top tier to be certain. Body gets a 6 out of 10. For the mouthfeel was a completely different story. This was a very thick, very resistant, quite viscous beer. Moving around the palate, really no creaminess, foaminess, velvetyness, but you could feel just how thick and resistant it was, and it really did a great job at coating the palate to let those flavors set in. Mouthfeel gets a perfect 10 out of 10. For the finish, this was quite a long finish, significantly longer than your average Imperial Stout. On this one, it really came down to pungency and intensity of flavors and ingredients in it. Really, really significantly longer, and kind of the way it ended up with this almost suggestion of sweet chocolate milk. It was really, really delicious. Finish gets a 9 out of 10. For the head and retention, this one did not do such a good job here. It is what it is. It tried repeatedly. It was just too effervescent. Immediately collapsed the whole time it was trying to form as I poured it. Head and retention gets a 1 out of 10. For the appearance exactly right. Pitch black as expected. That gets a perfect 10 out of 10. For the balance on this beer, I talk about balance all the time. The balance on this beer was exquisite. They had just a fundamentally excellent Imperial Stout malt bill, and then they added coconut, and they got everything in the right balance, so it just all worked. That is how to balance a big beer right there. Balance, 10 out of 10. Feeling the intangible subjectively, I loved it. It gets a 10 out of 10. Finally, is an example of the style. Overall, this beer did very well in most categories, but there were some notable exceptions, namely head and retention and body. That does impact kind of some pretty critical stylistic traits here. I still thought it was above average, and it swept every other category. So in the grand scheme of things, it still does get an average, above average ranking. So example of the style does get a 9 out of 10, which brings the total score on Anchorage Brewing Company's The Sacrifice to an 85 out of 100. Now that score alone already tells you it's a good beer. This is definitely above average. If we are to not consider the head and retention and the body, this beer would have scored significantly higher. And frankly, this is one I absolutely love. I think this is worth your time. And it's one that personally, if I see it again, I'm going to grab it because it was truly, truly delicious. Getting a big, intense Imperial Stout that has coconut, that gets it right, that is hard to come by. This is one to keep on your radar. Folks, that's today's review. As always, I do sincerely appreciate you tuning in today. Please don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe. And if you want to stay in the loop when our videos go live to YouTube, just turn on the notifications, click that bell icon. It is right next to the subscribe button. Until next time, keep it beer, keep it craft. We'll see you on the next one. Cheers.